Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week I talk about one of the best RPGs for the DS/3DS, and that is Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology. Now, specifically Perfect Chronology because it's pretty much a remake from the DS game, added on extra things, including voice acting and other cool stuff. And Radiant Historia came out at a time where we still live in this timeline, unfortunately, where Chrono Trigger is pretty much the only game of its kind, and will kind of remain its only game until Square decides to ever remake the damn thing, or ever get around to making that Chrono Break thing that they had a license for, or copyright for, forever. But at the time, Radiant Historia came out, and made by Atlus. You know, Atlus knows its stuff, and made Radiant Historia. Had some good quality stuff behind it, including Yoko Shimomura, who I did not know did the music until I rewatched footage of this, because again, rewatch, because I can't really replay it because 3DS and DS have kind of gone by the wayside these days. But suffice it to say, I've played Radiant Historia quite a bit, way back when, and reliving the story, which is kind of my wheelhouse at this stage, really kind of struck home for me a lot of cool things that I wish main characters would do, and that battle systems would do, while not really going against anything that the games themselves have built upon. Because good old-fashioned JRPGs always seem to just, bunch up and really make do, despite the fact that people keep saying they're dead for some reason. We're reliving that with Like a Dragon 8 and Persona 3 Reload currently. I mean, I can be living proof for both of those being really fucking good. And Radiant Historia is the same deal. Again, that era specifically, a lot of good old RPGs were just done by smaller companies like Atlus and Falcom and stuff like that. They moved to the DS and 3DS at the time in Japan because, let's face it, providing stuff for the PS3 and the early PS4 era was kind of shit, and they didn't have the money or the funds for it. But anyway, Radiant Historia was one of the, if not the biggest names in terms of those eras. I mean, stuff like Persona 4 Golden for the Vita were, big name ones. I liked stuff like Fantasy Life and other games like that, but really, Radiant Historia was kind of like that big name or big one that always gets remembered fondly, always gets brought up, and with good reason, because it does a lot of things differently of Chrono Trigger, but it follows along with that same idea that you're kind of bouncing around timelines and jumping around back and forward and changing things. This does it a little bit more linearly, but to be fair, Chrono Trigger did as well because it was the one that did that. The benefit of having a second version, a Perfect Chronology, is that you add in side stories. You add in cool sub-story things. You have choices involved. And what these characters do in the main timeline and the alternate timeline kind of converge and work. And then, just having the idea that even if it's just like a screen cap and stuff, having a direction that says, they failed. This is a failure state. Go back and fix it. Just having that personal choice, especially at the time when you make those choices, you don't want to force a choice. And it could be that you make the right choice, but you still have to wait to unlock part of a different storyline to get the thing that you need to do, like an action or a thing, or meet a person to do the thing and get it done correctly. So you have these things that you have to do to make it work. So between that works well, but it's also a tightly wound story. And it doesn't really screw around. It doesn't make mistakes with its storyline. Any mistakes it does do, it sets around being one of those possible endings. Some of them are kind of goofy and how weirdly dark they can be, but in other times they're not. The game doesn't waste its time doing a lot of comedic moments other than, just some side things. It is a very self-serious game, and it takes itself very seriously, and it doesn't really skip a beat at any point. And a lot of that has to do with its main character, and I will get into that eventually. But the story, as it happens, is between two warring nations in a world that is slowly being turned into sand. So desertification is the thing. Now, I won't go into the spoiler details, but suffice it to say, Alistel and Granorg are like the two main cities fighting and dealing with it. You got Alistel on one side that's building up these giant mechs called Thaumatech machines that are like you sit in them, or you're armored, or you're like in a mech suit or something like that, and you're just super fucking strong. Or they're robotic and they're super fucking strong and you deal with it. So you're learning how to do that crap. Granorg is just a despotic nation ruled by a stupid lady who came into power because she's a despot, basically. But they also seem to have something in them that could turn the tide of the war. They have the forces, they have the know-how outside of Protea. These people known as Diaz and Selvon, who are the real masterminds. Atlas still has people like General Hugo, Lieutenant General Raoul, and specifically Heiss, a guy voiced by Joe Thomas. And Heiss is the leader of Spicint, which I believe that's how it's called. It's Special Intelligence, or Spec Inc. I guess that's how it would be considered. A special agency tasked with assassinations and other small-scale things that, mercenary work, spy work, all that junk. So they do the work so the army can kind of do its own thing properly. And Heiss's best agent is Stock. And in the Perfect Chronology version, he's voiced by Xander Mobus, who was Joker in Persona. And what I love about Stock, and I said this about Ringo before in Soul Hackers 2, was the idea that he's strong-willed and doesn't take shit, but he isn't without a heart. And the idea is here that there are so many fucking protagonists, and I don't know if it's just a tendency that these games tend to have, or they want to have, where they're either standoffish and dickish, despite, everybody liking them, or they are weak-willed, mamby-pamby, the journey, the learning of a man, the hero's journey kind of thing, where you learn to be a strong-willed man and whatever. Stock is already pretty fucking strong. He's lived through shit. He's been in the army. He's been an intelligence agent for 5 or 10 or even 15 years at this point. He doesn't take shit. He's able to see where shit goes south, and he's able to pre-program in his brain before anybody can even act. Is he thinks through, is the best solution to just waste them? Is the best solution to talk to them? Is it the best to run away? He's a tactician, and he's smart about it. He knows when the best way to do a thing, and that comes into play with his power that he gains, called the White Chronicle. So even before he obtains it, he tries to lead a mercenary troop with Rainey and Marco, who were Lauren Landa and I believe Ben Diskin. The IMDb didn't list his name, unfortunately, and I'm going to say it is him as well. But Rainey and Marco are also under his employ, and he takes them under their wing and says, look, I need your help, but I'm not going to let you die. But they run afoul of Granorg, but then Stock finds himself in Historia. These two characters, Leo and Tipti, I believe, they are, Lipti and Teo. They are kind of the guardians of the Chronicle in a way. They know kind of what's going to happen, but they can't intervene. It's one of those if we tell you everything, it will just cloud your judgment. So you have the power to shape history how you see fit, and we kind of know where you need to go, but we need you to do it properly. So he is sent back, and he can always kind of go forward and back in time when shit goes south. But also by doing that, he can also kind of open different pathways. Usually it's a two-way street. He can go to an alternate history, or the main history, or he can choose, okay, via flux I can do a certain thing to do the right thing, or I cannot. He's also being warned of the Black Chronicle, which has been kind of making people go berserk or doing bad things or doing other cool stuff that's nasty and evil. So he has to kind of figure out who is behind all of this stuff and why they're behind all this stuff and what's going on. Along the way, he gets entangled at different storylines. So while they're diverging, you have, okay, I can stick with Heist and stay with the plan, or I can go with my friend Major Rosh, and because they were old friends. Rosh also joins the party. He's voiced by Greg Chun, who is Nanba in the recent Yakuza games, and Date in Somnium Files. I need to get to the review of Somnium Files too, now that I think about it. But Rosh is very caring and understanding, but he's kind of brutish and, well, not dumb, but he's charismatic. It's like Stock is the tactician, while the tactician and the advisor type, while Rosh is the like face of the thing. They're called the Young Lions. They're really good at their jobs, either via intelligence or just brute force. Rosh's whole thing is he has a gauntlet made of Thaumatech, and it replaces an arm of his, but he's just still like a big guy who can just do some strange, strong powers and shit. And, they grow a friendship. They're with their friend in Nilesdale, and they know shit's going wrong, but they don't know what to do with it. So you can either go in one timeline or you can go another. You could stay with Heist and do one thing. You can go to the alternate timeline and do a different thing. I believe in the main timeline, you're tasked with assassinating a princess. They don't know why. They don't know how. Stock questions it, but doesn't really go about it. But he finds his way to Grand Org and ends up either joining the Resistance or at least finding the Princess Erica. And she's voiced by Erica Mendez. And Erica's whole thing is, my mother is a fucking piece of garbage. I want to overthrow the government, and I need to get rid of Diaz and Selvin, the real masterminds of things. So, Stock and Rainey and others are kind of left on the lurch. While they're doing that, Stock also meets someone known as Ott, voiced by Cassandra Lee Morris. And then she's tacked on with Gofka. He's the last main party member, voiced by DC Douglas. And that kind of makes up your main party. Heist is one of the main antagonists, obviously. But you've got your main party in that. And it kind of varies back and forth in the timeline. So the main timeline is you're kind of learning more about the Erica side of things and Grand Org and all that fun junk. In the alternate timeline, you kind of go against Alastel, but you learn a different side of things where Yugo, who's been kind of this paladin that extols the virtues of the prophet Noah. Noah was a real dude, but nobody knows or have seen him since, and Yugo's the one talking for him. So you can kind of piece together something's not quite right there. So shit goes south in different ways, in different storylines, and they converge, but they don't. That's the benefit. And then all along with that, if you go into the perfect chronology version, you also meet Nemesia, who gives you these side missions while you're doing things, these possible histories. And the possible histories are mostly just, hey, go to a place you've been before and gather an artifact. Do a little boss fight. There are these 30-minute side quests, basically, if that. And you're going around doing the thing, and you're learning about artifacts. Eventually, you learn about Nemesia too. And one of the endings is kind of locked behind getting them all. So finishing up her arc and learning more about her and what's going on is also a part of it. So that's an additional thing you could do alongside another couple of dungeons. There's this giant fucking dungeon of monsters and shit that you can also fight in, tied to Nemesia's thing. So you do all these kinds of things and learn all these fucking things. And while you're doing the main storyline and all doing that, you learn about the Celestia and Satiros, the people that Ott belonged to, the more natural law and order of the world kind of thing, rather than Grand Org and Alastel as human counterparts. You've got Gutrals, which is what Gofka is from. They have their own thing. You got Cygnus. These places that are involved, but not directly, but get involved because of the plot. And while I don't want to give into everything as like what's going on, you slowly piece together that everything starts to make sense. You start to understand why, as immediate as like Stock meets Ott, you kind of realize, okay, something's off here. She doesn't want to say something. You realize as soon as Erica meets Stock that even she knows something is off, and you don't know what is going on. So Stock, as a main character, is being thrust into all of these different things, whether it's by fate or by his own volition. And I do think he balances that well, because he knows he's fated to do a thing, but he's not stupid enough to fall for any tricks, you know? So fatalism and roles and all that shit aside, he's able to use his own power wisely. And that really is what sets him apart. And I really appreciate that he wasn't played as a fool. He is smart enough to take any situation and turn it on its head for his own advantage. If he can't, he'll find a pathway in the Historia where he will learn a way out of it. So all these little things aside, all these little story arcs coalesce, and then it helps that the battle system is unique. The battle system is very grid-based, and each character kind of fits in different modes. But the idea here is that you have a 9x9 grid, and in a 3x you have a 3x3 for the enemies and a 1x3 for your main party. And you don't get pushed around a lot, but you could push around the enemies a bit more. And the main tactic is a bunch of pushes and pulls and grapples and assaults, and getting different enemies into different spots to do either elemental damage, more physical damage, line-based or cross-based damage, diagonal damage. This is the idea. Setting them in different spots so that you can do things. The enemies can do like guarding or healing on their end, so they can put these like barriers up that the unit to beat them to get rid of the counters or whatever like that. So you can take them out of their buff positions or take them out of their debuff spots. You can move them around every which way, and every character kind of fits different modes. You have Stock, who is a fire-based attacker, but is still physical. He kind of moves people up and down and back and forward. Rainy is a magic user, so she does elemental damage and a little bit of healing here and there. Marco is an assist, support character, heals very well, but also, buffs the party or does debuffs. Rosh, Gothka, all physical. Erica kind of fits the physical and healer type, and that's really interesting and cool. But Ott is kind of the linchpin of a lot of strategies, because what she does is she lays down elemental weakness traps or status effect traps. And if you're able to maneuver people into those spots, they take a shit ton of damage, especially later in the game, because those traps do a lot. So your main goal, if you use the Ott formation, which a lot of people tend to do, is find a party that can maneuver characters around into those spots where Ott sets up traps. And, those traps can do a lot of damage, and she can deal with her supports and debuffs too. So she's not just a trap user, but she does a shit ton of damage on her own end. I don't know if it's the most damage, because the physical attacker and whatever are their own benefit. She's more of a magic user still, but it's one of those strategies where you kind of base it on what character you want to use and what's the best synergy. So finding the best method for an enemy, finding their weaknesses and then finding out, can they be moved? Can they be attacked? Can they be dealt with? Can you survive their attacks? Do you have enough healing? All this stuff. And harder difficulties can be quite challenging. Somebody actually mentioned that they were playing the game on their own, and they said, damn, this is tough. And I was wondering what difficulty they were playing, and it was either like hard or normal. And I was like, I'm not the best when it comes to dealing with difficulty, so I'm not the be all end all to talk about. But I remember when I played it, it was still a decent challenge, even if I was on an easy difficulty. So I was like, if you're playing on it too hard, it requires a lot more strategy, even for me. But knowing that the battles work in those senses, and they're very fast paced too. The grid format works great, and it doesn't like slow down the game either. It's not grid as in move your characters and do a thing. It's moving them in a turn-based system, so it's still very snappy and quick. Your characters move very fast. They get in and out of battles very quick, and that's really a good thing, especially since you're trying to keep momentum, given that this is a mobile game. You might be on a bus or a train or a car ride or something like that, and you need to get things faster. Between how this story progresses, between the characters themselves, which are all well done and well realized. One of the best parts about Perfect Chronology is that the character artwork has been drastically changed. Some people didn't like it. I personally think all of them all look better. Stock looks a little bit less standoffish and looks more like an officer. You've got Rainey, who looks a million times better. Erica specifically gets like the biggest upgrade. Her hair is kind of like very short and very kind of like, not buzz cut, but like very short for this princessy look to her. It doesn't look very regal to me. I don't know, something about it. But then in the redo, she does this long flowing mane of hair, bright blonde hair, and just a big white accoutrement outfit with a little bit of greens added in. It just looks a much bigger, much flashier kind of feel to it. Much more intense looking character. And it fits too, because like I said, the voice acting here is on point. And I've said this because a lot of these people I know from other games, and they don't screw around. They're very good. And I think that the voice acting adds a lot, especially to the 3DS version, because the game itself was good anyway. But the additions don't detract from it. They remaster the game without retooling it to the point where it's no longer the same game, The one drawback, if any, is that it was on the 3DS. There's not much else we can do, and unless they re-release it, it's kind of like the Bravely Default thing, where if they ever decide to re-release it for modern consoles, you kind of have to wait for it. Same thing with Phoenix Wright. They were kind of stuck on those old school mobile platforms, not really given a current console release until recently. Phoenix Wright got them, so it stands to reason that someday Radiant Historia or Bravely Default or something else might get a re-release or something like that on a modern console. So it's not out of the realm of possibility for people who have not played it, or if people don't own a 3DS or a DS, to experience a really good game, from a time when their options were limited by technology, because PlayStation 3 and Xbox were not really the best options for these kinds of games. And even late PS2, we were getting into that early PS3, late PS3 era before the PS4 started and was better technology. And, the Japanese market was stuck behind that mobile market. So Dragon Quest 9, same example. Good games were stuck in that era and haven't been brought back in most cases, at least yet. But I'm still hopeful. Radiant Historia is well liked, and I think it someday should get its day again. Even just porting this version to the modern consoles, make it sound better with a better tech would be a start, because on its own, Radiant Historia was great. Add in the extra stuff that the Perfect Chronology version did, you've got something that is a meaty game that's like 40 some hours, give or take, and doesn't feel like it. It's really slick. So would I recommend Radiant Historia? Absolutely. It was one of the best RPGs of the last 15 to 20 years, and I would hold it up even against some of the stuff like Persona and Yakuza. For a franchise that only really has this one game to its name, it's really intense and good. But that'll do it for today. And along with all the other stuff that I'm going to do, I've added Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth to April's lineup of podcasts. So I know I'll beat the game within the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'm sure, provided I get stuck on Dondoko Island and doing other shit like Sujimon and whatever, but I'm sure I'm going to beat it by the time I need to record a podcast around it, excuse me. So that'll be in April. I've got Arte and some other things coming up in the next couple of weeks. But for now, that'll do it for this episode. I'm Citizen Strife, and I'll see you later. Signing off.